welcome to the last discussion today. My name is Franziska Wolff. I'm the quantum chemistry lead from Capgemini, and I'm the moderator today. And yeah, we're talking today about real-world application of quantum computing and focusing on how quantum technology can have an impact in pharmaceutical industry. And usually you would assume now we're talking about chemistry, but we don't doing. We have a special panel today because these are all experts on alternative use cases, not chemistry use cases. And yeah, covering the other part of the pharmaceutical development process, the clinical trials, not the drug discovery phase. And yeah, we have here Thomas Ehmer from Merck. We have Jens Kieckbusch from AstraZeneca and Zoran Krunic from Amgen. And yeah, we will discuss a little bit about the strategy, about the impact and the challenges of quantum technology in that field, and also about some applications. And at the end, we will have some time for audience questions before I will end up with a closing question to all of you. And yeah, to make it a little bit more interesting, I want to ask you before you introduce yourself to share some surprising fact with us. Maybe not all of us know already. Yeah. So.
I see. Well, this was the hardest question I can think of, but I'll say probably when I was in high school, I wasn't sure if I wanted to study electrical engineering, which I ended up studying at the end, computer science, or architecture. I was actually very much in love with architecture, wanted to be an architect, but at the end decided not to. So, but that's still something that I always kind of aspire to think about that, but you know, it didn't happen.
That's a much more interesting fact than I can think of. I guess something that I was reflecting on when I came here, I guess, is that this is the 10th time I've actually been to Paris, and it's always a real pleasure to be here, and any excuse to come is always great. So,
and I'm keen to see, Zoran, that you have been in a kind of a similar situation, because I was also at school checking if I want to do music or physics. So I choose physics, but the interesting fact is there is a very interesting field of quantum music. So there's Professor Eduardo Miranda, and I'm making synthesizer sounds by tuning the Bloch sphere. So that's cool. So if later you want to check it out.
Sounds interesting. Yeah, so let's come to the first question. So what do you think are the specific areas where quantum computing or the quantum technology in the pharmaceutical research can really have an impact? So maybe Thomas, you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. So I think the obvious question is, of course, do quantum chemistry with quantum computers. And I think throughout the conference, and if you have attended this talk and the other talks earlier from Covestro, it's kind of far off. And I think the metric we have identified with the quarks, so how many quarks can we do, or tera quarks per second, I think we really need to check out if quantum chemistry for a pharmaceutical company makes sense at all. And therefore, strategically, I'm rather very much more interested in leveraging quantumness in all these non-gate-based approaches, and I'm just exploring. So I think that definitely there is a lot of things that quantum could do, like graph optimization things, and then always the problem is how do you map this to an industry relevant problem, and this is where it's starting to get interesting. This is why we are here, also to learn what others are doing. That's my take.
Yeah,
did this answer the question or not really? But
yeah, it answers the question. Yeah. What's a few from Jens?
yeah, absolutely. Well, I guess it's important to focus on what we're actually doing, right? I mean, we deliver value to patients, and that involves lots of things outside of chemistry as well, right? I mean, we do lots of things from very early discovery science type chemistry all the way to delivering actually medicines to patients in the end. And there are lots of problems that might potentially map onto a quantum computer. And as you said, Thomas, chemistry might be still quite far off in the future. It's probably the most kind of economically valuable application for quantum computing in the pharma industry. But I think on the way there, there's lots of other applications, for example, in supply chains or in clinical trial optimization or in patient selection that are really interesting to explore. And I think we're just really beginning to scratch the surface there. And there might be lots of areas that we haven't really thought about yet that are also quite interesting. So I would really take an enterprise-wide look onto this and not just focus on this one application of chemistry, which is quite far off, but arguably very promising.
Right, and I think if you look at the whole process that happens in the biopharmaceutical industry, you start with different molecules that are produced, but then there is this second half, which is actually probably bigger than half, and that's going through clinical trials. And it starts at phase 1, phase 2, and then phase 3 clinical trials. That's where the majority of the cost of new medication development lies. And especially phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials happen on very small data sets. 100, 150, 200 patients, and so that's an opportunity from classical machine learning perspective. It's a difficult territory. There is great potential that QML, quantum machine learning, might be able to do that better, training on small data samples sizes and still deliver good predictability. So that's a big area. Also, there is clinical trial optimization, how we assign patient sites in the process of bigger clinical trials like phase 3 or post 3. That's extremely important. It's more or less optimization problem, and so that's quite a big target. So we have quite a few high-value use cases. Recently, we also have opportunity to look at generative AI and merge with quantum, and that means opens the territory for extracting lots of information from unstructured data that we didn't really do that well 5 years ago. So there is a lot to be done and lots of potential targets. We just have to see what works quickest and the best. So, but
Yeah, quite interesting. So Jens, I'm curious about, so you mentioned you explore different areas in your organization. I'm wondering how you are exploring this.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, right? So we don't, because there are so many areas, there's no way we have a quantum expert for each of these areas in the right teams, right? It's just not happening. So a lot of the time we are exploring these areas with external partners. Many of them are here at this conference, and they're very use case specific, right? And that has worked really well for us. And I don't really think this is scalable forever into the future, but I think at this early stage of this technology, that is extremely useful for us. We get to know the ecosystem, we get to know who is aligned with us, with our values, with what we want to achieve. And yeah, we can kind of try out what works best for us. And that's how we have been doing this. For us, most of this is very much pre-competitive, so we like to publish in this area. I think it's important that we're not all doing the same VQE algorithm 10 times, right? I mean, it's important to publish this and move the field onwards with it. And I think we are all, as pharma, quite aligned on this. I don't think there's just one company that does this. I think we're all kind of doing the same thing at the moment, because we see this as a technology with huge potential, but it's very early and we need to kind of develop it together.
So you're partnering also with startups and different companies.
Yes, and
or academia.
It's a difficult conversation sometimes, because, and I had these conversations here many times in the last 2 days, right? Because again, we don't really know what maps well onto a quantum computer, because someone from supply chain comes to me with a problem that I've never thought about even, or someone from chemistry comes with a problem, right? And does this map? We don't have the expertise to figure this out, but we have a lot of external partners. We can talk to them about it, and sometimes this leads to a collaboration, and quite often it leads to them saying, maybe in 5 years, it's a bit too early for this. And that's also a good answer for us. That's what we appreciate.
Okay, cool. So, Thomas, what do you expect from quantum computing? How would it change the pharma industry? What happens?
That's the question, yeah. I think what I always see interesting is that quantum is different, and I think what we lack in the overall population, and even worse in companies, is an information, so this quantum nativeness, so that you understand, if I have a system and how do I quantize a system, so how do I make use of the quantum features. And I think this is the very crucial first step to be available to translate your real-world problems into how can I solve them computationally, if at all, and if I can solve them computationally, where would quantum then play a role? So I think this is currently quite tough because we have an idea how to solve. I mean, it's not the purpose of the company to sell drugs, even though some people say the pharma industry just don't make money. No, we're not interested in that. So we're really interested in helping people living better lives. And the blockbuster paradigm is, I guess, gone. So there is not, I give you a drug and you take it independent if it works or not, because it's neither sustainable from the energy perspective, nor is it good for the patient, and also it's just too expensive to waste resource. And therefore, I think we land in the end of personalized medicine, and this will need to change the whole way we do research, because currently we have an idea of a disease mechanism. We generate a mouse who is mimicking this disease progression, and then we do some laboratory stuff, and then in the end we go back to human, and we detect it works in 0.05% in mankind. So it's really a waste of effort, and I think therefore we might want to look how quantum thinking helps us better target our those guys who want to profit from this. And I don't have an answer to this question, but I think it's a very crucial point to always bring this up, that there is not only quantum computing, there is quantum sensing that could have very big impact on how we measure patients, and then there is also the quantum biology itself. Can we trigger biological effects by using quantum effects, which is just emerging? So there's a huge opportunity, and the question is how we need to address this internally to each and every knows, and who doesn't want to hear it.
And yeah, it sounds interesting. So you mean combining all the different technologies in this quantum world, and yeah, personalize the medicine at the end, and pulling all the stuff together to get better health for the patients. Okay. May you can say some words about how you approach it in your organization to explore the spaces. Yes.
Yeah, I think we also worked with startups, and I think there is 2018 at Q2B in San Francisco. There was a get together of you work in quantum, you work in quantum, you work in quantum. So there was a first initiative called Q-Pharma. I think we disbanded because a lot of the people went away from their companies. But currently, so I'm working actively in the Pistoia Alliance. So there is this association from the pharma companies, pre-competitive. There are a few people, I'm not so sure you are in. And so we are a group of friends, of peers. So we really have to attack this point internally as an industry. And then, of course, inside of the industry, I'm giving educational talks. I'm trying to run projects. So I have a funded project which is supporting a real other project where we try to get the quantum component adding value to the running project, which is quite tough, but this brings at least attention. And then I think always the question is in how far are you overwhelmed? So at least these days, my job quickly changes to be what can I do with LLMs? And I think this LLM hype is taking away a bit of the openness to think also on longer term benefits with quantum. Because everything, now you have this instant gratification. I just don't need to think, I just press enter and then the LLM gives me the solution. I think we need to manage the expectation also here. But I'm just talking a lot internally, and we do some coding experiences with startups. Or
Does it change the awareness within a company?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It does, but it's slow.
Okay. Yeah, Zoran, you mentioned data analysis and also analysis with spare data. How you think quantum computing could complement existing machine learning models or artificial intelligence models?
Well, I think on one side, quantum computing has currently the limit of how big the data sets could be. But fortunately, that's not a problem in itself, because we have lots of small data sets that are absolutely critical from oncology to rare diseases. And then just acquired the company, $27 billion acquisition of rare diseases, so it comes with lots of small data sets. So I think those are very difficult for classical machine learning, next to impossible. And so I think if we can make even a 5% improvement in predictions and move it from 0.61 to 0.65 or 6, that on the large scale, a large number of patients, will really produce critically important improvement. So I think if you can have that, that's very simple area. Another area that quantum is potentially very useful right now is quantum MCMC, Markov chain Monte Carlo. Those methods in classical space, Markov chain Monte Carlo, MCMC called usually, is used in drug dose and response, patient response optimization process of how you structure the dosing of drugs to achieve minimum side effects and maximum positive effect on patients. And so that's part of the design, very important part of designing new clinical trials. There is a limit, it's combinatorial problem, so usually stop your simulations after a couple of days, right? Because just cannot hyperparameterize it enough. If quantum can do that better, and there are a couple of good papers, one came from NVIDIA last year, showing that there are some potential improvements where you can run number of samples. Let's say if you have 1 million samples in classical computing, you might be able to do it as a square root of that, which is only 1,000. So those are potentially huge improvements, theoretically possible. In practice, we are working right now to see if some of that is really true and how much we can get mileage of that. But those are all really big and very tangible, useful, very active parts of the drug design process and execution to clinical trials, and they're really important. So I think any of those will be even a couple of percent improvement or speed improvement, which allows you to basically run more simulations and see better potential outcomes. That's just very, very important.
Yeah, interesting. So this sounds really promising. So does this help to position quantum within your organization?
Well, so classical simulations are right now done, for example, on HPC, on high performance computing, but there are limits to how far you can go with that, right? If quantum can come in and do that better, definitely. Now, do you really create a quantum group or do you distribute it? I think my knee-jerk reaction to that is that you probably want to have distributed quantum knowledge across the organization. I think centralization has certain benefits, but distribution is important because it will bring more ideas and more people involved. And I think, just like, for example, quantum is right now where NLP and generative AI were 5 years ago. And so there is a need for a lot of people to be involved, even if nothing particularly useful comes out of that, because by learning that process and dealing with problems and understanding what doesn't work and why it doesn't work, eventually gets you to the point with a little improvement in technology, you will be able to now produce results. That's what happened with generative AI. We were working on NLP for 5, 6, 7 years, and now with ChatGPT and similar models, we're in position, and there is the company-wide initiative. We have press releases working with OpenAI and just a large amount of activity, and we are seeing results which are extremely useful, something that, frankly, we couldn't really imagine doing 3 years ago, for example.
So it's also the topic about learning what's possible, what's not possible.
Right.
So we, at the end, when we are so far to be able to say, yes, we're doing it. Okay, cool. Yeah, so you mentioned other areas in your company. What other areas do you explore for quantum?
So I think my focus is on QML, quantum machine learning, but because I'm in the department that's also heavily statistical and works on Markov chain Monte Carlo as part of the clinical trial design, I'm involved in that as well, and there is initiative right now to look at quantum from that side. There is molecular part always. Now that's not my specialty, it's a different part of research and development, so I'm not there. But I think if QML can work, then you're going to see it getting accepted across the organization, because there are lots of different places where classical machine learning is applied to electronic health records, clinical data sets. I mean, that's going to cover probably half of Amgen. So I think the question is, can this lead few use cases really produce something that you can say, now we have something that we should go wide and get everybody involved.
Mm-hmm. So what are the best practices and lessons learned from the last years? From your experience from the last years in this quantum area.
I think one because I've been hands-on on this for about 4 years now, so one is that you don't really want to go and look at the quantum as a hobby that you do 3 hours a week. That hasn't worked for us. When we started this collaboration with IBM 4 years ago, they told us, this is not a hobby. Don't try to do it on Friday afternoon, like Google has that Friday afternoon, like 4 hours. No, don't do that. It is a full-time job. It's more than a full-time job, so you need people who like to do this, who are willing to face difficult things and be dedicated, but at the same time, try to attack problems which are tangible and kind of incremental. So for example, you take the classical machine learning platform, and if you use kernels, for example, which is commonly used in quantum, swap the classical kernel with the quantum kernel, and everything else stays the same. So you kind of focus on kernels, understand that, start to use it, and then slowly, incrementally, don't try to use learn the whole quantum computing with everything from, difficult mathematics that are inside and everything that happens. It's very difficult to, I think, learn that ground up, right? And because you really spend most of the time understanding the data, the clinical context and everything else, and so try to do it incrementally, and hybrid paradigm, I think it's pretty good one to start with at least.
Yeah. So I also want to know from you, Jens, what are your lessons learned?
Yeah, I think that learning aspect, I think, is really important for expectation management internally. I think as an industry, we're used to having pretty high R&D budgets compared to other industries, and we are used to taking risks. I mean, 90% of drugs fail when you look at it across the industry, right? From the moment you make the molecule to something that may or may not end up with patients. So we are used to taking risks and spending money on this, and I think managing expectations and not selling it as something that will generate revenue in the next 2 or 3 years is really important. Position it properly in the company as a learning exercise to get people upskilled and kind of explore this technology. Something that we have seen in this area is also that, of course, the people we are hiring are changing, just because what is taught at universities is now changing. So we actually see that just by chance, some of the people we hired in the last year or two have actually some experience in quantum because they have a physics degree and they just did something on the side. And you know, that knowledge is slowly coming in without us even trying too hard. And if you do have this push and the pull at the same time, so you're kind of upskilling people that are in the organization by letting them interact with startups and real experts in the field, and at the same time you get new talent in, I think that can be really powerful. And because we're all in this for the long run, this is not going to be resolved in 2 or 3 years again. I think that is promising, at least in my mind.
Yeah, cool, exciting. So if I look on the time, maybe we have some time now for some question from the audience.
The camera has us. You need to be on tape.
Okay. So my question is, at the end of the year, when the whole year is passed, what makes each of you individually successful in the year? What is a successful quantum year? How is that defined?
Being on panels. No, I mean, I think what makes successful is really to see the community grow. There are always new perspectives coming in, and sometimes it's just super surprising things that you have never thought of that are ever relevant to you, like this graph optimization things that I mean, it's quite a sophisticated thing, but apparently somebody's publishing on my neutral atom computers, you can do this thing super good, and then we have somebody, not myself, but there would be people in the company that, oh, this qualifies for this kind of problem. And I think the dialogue is good, so you always grow the extensions, and I would be not happy if I would not have, by the end of next year or every year, more connections working, more discussion. So I think it's not so far about, I can say this because I'm a technology scout, I'm not a salesperson. So I'm happy if I achieve more connections with potential ways to work forward, because I don't have to deliver results. What would be perfect, of course, if I would have a quantum solution that is solving patient's life better. I mean, that would be the hit, and I would hope to be the matchmaker for that. But that's, yeah.
Yeah, I think our roles are pretty similar. I'm also a technology scout, so I'm not measured by hard outcomes like that. What is really important is starting new projects for us, but it needs to be a good fit, right? We're not starting projects to chase metrics. These conversations just are often quite serendipitous, and you can't really force this. So it's really about publishing, making connections, getting to know companies, getting to know the ecosystem. That's really what people expect of me. And then getting traction internally, right? To have people internally at more and more senior levels think about this as really something that we should invest in the future. I mean, that's how I measure my own success, I guess, getting buy-in, getting FTE time, and those kinds of things. But it's not, there's no kind of RAG rating for how well we're doing these things, because it's a small part of my role.
Yeah, I think there are probably two parts of it. One is trying to run at least a couple of meaningful use cases, maybe even scale down if necessary, but ideally finding those that don't have to be scaled down, that are already in that scale range, like small data sets, for example, and producing something and seeing where we are, learning from positive and negative results as well. Just like when you train a machine learning model, you need positive and negative samples. I think this is the same. And then establishing these collaborations, these conferences are particularly useful. We establish and talk about lots of things, and every time I go home after this, I know that there are a couple of new things, a couple of new partnerships, because quantum is too big for any single entity. And I think these collaborations, is it between companies, between continents, between countries, however you do it, I think that's probably half of the picture here, not just internal efforts. And then third one, I think what you just mentioned is, yes, we want to increase the visibility of this kind of technology. I see, for example, that Amgen is picking up speed on quantum quite a bit this year. In addition to generative AI, which, yes, it's kind of a good and bad thing that happened to quantum, I think, having generative AI. But I think the good thing is that first it can help, and second is it's maybe putting little nice positive pressure on us to do a little more. But I think that's a successful year. Collaborations, some use cases, and getting more people involved, and kind of starting to fill the components in this big picture that 2 years ago was pretty much lots of empty space and few little Lego blocks. Right now we are starting to get the bigger picture in place and starting to see how it makes more sense. So I think that's a very successful year if I can do that.
Yeah, impressive answer. Maybe time for one short question.
I'll make it a real quick question, and I will specifically direct it towards Jens. Because you mentioned that you have some physicists around your company, maybe, and this just hit me that it reminds me that back in the 70s and 80s, I'm talking about 1900, those times, a lot of physicists were hired by Wall Street, the finance companies. You know that, right? So, but back in the days, I remember that they required no prior knowledge or training in finance at all. They just picked physicists out of the graduate school, thinking that they're smart enough to learn what they need to teach them. But do you feel that's how we should go now, or do you specifically look at people with some experience in pharmaceutical industry, or for that matter, maybe chemistry?
No, I think what I was referring to is really that just by chance, we are getting more of that experience in. I mean, as a pharma company, we hire a lot of physicists anyway, right? I mean, there's a lot of physics that happens from the moment you discover a molecule to the moment that actually makes it to patients. And it just so happens that the courses that these people take at university before they get their PhDs or whatever degree they come to us with are now very different than they were 10 or 20 years ago. And many of them have at least the foundations in quantum physics, and some of them have actually delved a lot deeper than that. And so for us, without even trying, the expertise internally is slowly changing, and I can only imagine that it will accelerate over time. So we are not hiring physicists and then put them in a chemistry team just because they know something about quantum. They are still doing the job for which we would always hire physicists, but they also have this additional expertise that is extremely useful in what's to come. Yeah.
And I think I just want to highlight this, the importance of diversity. So diversity on 1 minute, okay. Diversity on educational background, because sometimes you just have a thought of a school of thought if you're a chemist or biology or philosophy or I don't know, medicine or physics. And I think the challenge is then, or not the challenge, the opportunity is to come together and sit over dinner or lunch or whatever, or even working in projects on the job, to bring in these challenging questions. And I'm quite happy that we have a relatively open culture in our company, and we have even curiosity in our values. So I think this changed. So I can just confirm, so since the last 5 years or so, the culture really changed. So it's a cultural change that even those guys who you thought are relatively focused and limited in their perspective, they start asking questions. And this is then, of course, answered by physics or by other guys, and also the physicists ask questions who would, I mean, they would not have asked about medicine or psychology, and that's really cool.
Yep, cool. Yeah, I'm guess we're coming to an end, and I have a really last question for you, and maybe you can give a very short answer, everybody of you. It's quite challenging. So, yeah, imagine we have quantum computing with several thousands of qubits tomorrow. Do you know what we do with that, or and what would it be? Maybe, Thomas, you can start.
My first answer would be I sell them on eBay. No, but I think with 1 million qubits, or even if I had 1 million qubits, I would just wait for the speed of execution and the error tolerance, and then I would go for individualized medicine. So there are a lot of ways to target individualized treatment, and this would be a big research project, but that's where I would go.
Okay.
I think if you have the right size, chemistry is the obvious way to go. It's so many years in the future, though. But if it dropped now down from space, I would probably do some sort of in silico simulation for chemistry on it.
And you, Zoran?
I would bring generative AI into it. We are already starting to see the merge. Generative AI is being used to build quantum circuits, for example, as a sequence of elements. So I think there is a huge potential there. It's a tool. It's not generative AI, right? But it is something that could potentially be a great combination. So that's definitely a way I would go.
Wow, 3 different answers. That's cool. Yeah, then I want to thank you to be here, and thank the audience for your patience. And yeah.